When the facts bend reality, this is beyond plausible.
A hospital room's sterile white light bled into her vision, but the air smelled of damp earth and rusted metal, not antiseptic. Her fingers brushed the cold, sticky sheets, feeling not crisp cotton but something fibrous and damp, like wet roots. The steady beep of the heart monitor had been replaced by a low, wet, rhythmic scratching from somewhere beneath the bed. She tried to scream, but her throat seized, filled with the taste of ozone and decay, as if she'd been breathing grave air. Shadows in the room didn't belong to medical equipment. They writhed and pooled independently, forming shapes that whispered just below hearing. This was no ordinary coma. Her mind hadn't gone dark. It had been pulled into a place that existed in the hospital's forgotten foundations. And in this place, she wasn't a patient recovering. She was prey, slowly realizing the thing keeping her alive was also what had trapped her here. It was a prison of routine, a perfect, terrifying facsimile of the real world. When she finally opened her eyes in the sterile hospital room, the relief was a fleeting ghost. The doctors, smelling the sharp tang of antiseptic, realized the horror was not over. She had brought the rigid, suffocating routine with her, a damp, clinging presence in the very air. A single, jarring beep from the heart monitor cut to absolute silence. The music shifted to a melancholic piano as warm, saturated photos appeared. This was Sarah Miller from Austin, Texas. Her vibrant life was about to become the source of an unspeakable mystery. She was an architect by trade, a rock climber by passion, her life a tapestry of spontaneous paths. But on a rain-lashed November night, driving home from a friend's, her journey met a sudden, brutal end. The tires shrieked against the black ice, a sound swallowed by the wet night. Then came the sickening, final chorus. The crunch of metal, the violent shatter of glass. The sterile hospital room was a tomb of white light and quiet machines. The trauma had been catastrophic. A severe traumatic brain injury. Now she lay motionless, surrounded by the rhythmic sighs and beeps of life support. Sarah had slipped into a deep, unresponsive coma, a prisoner within her own mind. Doctors told her family to prepare for the worst, or perhaps for a life of perpetual stillness. Her husband John and sister Lisa settled into a grueling vigil, a marathon of hope measured only in faint breaths and the steady beep of a monitor. The sterile air hung thick with the scent of antiseptic and a silent, gathering dread. Exhausted, John held Sarah's hand, each quiet moment stretching into an eternity. Days dissolved into weeks dissolved into months. Sarah's body was present, but Sarah was absent, or so they believed. But then, Nurse Angela, a veteran with 20 years on the neurology ward, noticed something off. It was subtle, a discrepancy in the room's familiar rhythm that only her seasoned instincts could detect. The metronomic pulse of the ward, once a comfort, now felt like a countdown. Her breath caught as she isolated the anomaly. A cold, clinical scent of ozone lingering where it shouldn't, and a faint, dry scratching that didn't belong to the night shift. It was almost imperceptible, but it happened without fail. Every evening at precisely 6:45 p.m., the reading on Sarah's respiratory monitor would hitch. Just once, a tiny, rhythmic anomaly that defied explanation. At 11 a.m., precisely as environmental services began their cleaning, Sarah's left index finger twitched. It wasn't a random spasm, but a deliberate, controlled tap. Once. Then, after a breath held in the sterile air, it tapped a second time. Angela reported the pattern to Dr. Evans, the lead neurologist. He dismissed it as random nerve firings, mere static from a damaged brain. But Angela, unconvinced by the clinical explanation, began keeping a detailed log. Each entry was a quiet testament to the rhythm she alone perceived in the sterile quiet. The pattern persisted with unnerving precision. At 6:45 p.m., her breath would catch. At 11 a.m., a single finger tapped the table. Her pulse would quicken at 3:15 p.m., precisely when the pharmacy cart's wheels rattled down the corridor. Each event was a metronome of dread, marking the hours of her confinement. In her comatose state, Sarah's mind was reconstructing the hospital's mechanical routine. Her consciousness, adrift in darkness, had anchored itself to the facility's daily rhythms. From sensory echoes alone, her brain was building a phantom replica of reality. The sterile air carried traces of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, the scent of her mind's desperate architecture. Ghostly outlines of spectral nurses materialized, their forms shifting with the beeps that formed a pulsating, unnatural landscape. Then, after 8 months of stillness, the impossible happened. Sarah opened her eyes, a slow, unnatural movement that seemed to draw the air from the room. The swelling music of hope twisted into something dissonant and metallic as she remained propped up in bed, motionless. John wept, clutching her, but Sarah's gaze was vacant, her eyes darting without recognition. It was a miracle, yes, but the miracle was wrong, tainted by an unsettling absence where her memories should have been. The air grew thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic, and something faintly metallic, like old copper. She didn't know him. Her husband was now a stranger, and that emptiness was more terrifying than any monster. She didn't utter a word, her gaze fixed and hollow. Then, at precisely 7:03 a.m., her head pivoted with unnatural stiffness toward the door. The movement was accompanied by a faint, wet cracking sound from her joints. As the door opened, Chloe entered with a breakfast tray, the scent of antiseptic and overcooked eggs filling the space. Sarah's arm lifted in a stiff, mechanical gesture, mirroring the exact motion Chloe had made to lower the guardrail. The clatter of Chloe's tray echoed in the sterile quiet as she froze, the air suddenly thick with ozone and dread. John stared, his mind clawing through confusion, the primal wrongness of the moment settling into his bones. As the day unfolded, the horror crystallized. Sarah's routine continued, an eerie echo of a life she didn't know she'd live. At 10 a.m., her hand moved in a vague, brushing pattern over her sternum, a perfect mimicry of morning physical therapy exercises she'd never consciously witnessed. Then at 2 p.m., her arm swept in a slow, deliberate arc, mirroring the exact path of a tree branch's shadow that the sun painted on her wall each afternoon. Her unconscious mind had recorded everything, playing it back with terrifying precision. Medical scans revealed the truth. Sarah's conscious mind, memory, speech, personality, remained shattered, locked away. But her procedural memory, that deep subconscious groove, was flawless. She had survived the coma by becoming a living recording of her surroundings. Her consciousness had retreated, leaving behind a hollow shell that moved through life on autopilot. It was a ghost haunting the machinery of her own daily routine. Dr. Evans. It's like she constructed a perfect replica of the world to inhabit while her own vanished. And now, she can no longer distinguish the copy from the original. Sarah sits in a quiet rehabilitation facility, her movements less rigid but her eyes distant and hollow. John sits beside her, holding a faded photo of them hiking, a ghost of their former life. The air carries the faint scent of antiseptic and something else, something stale and forgotten. Sarah has made progress, but the silence between them feels heavier than the mountain in that photograph. She manages a few broken words. Occasionally, her gaze fixes on John with unsettling clarity. But each evening at 6:45, all movement ceases. A sharp, ragged inhale cuts the air, the same gasp from her coma. Her eyes glaze over, returning to that sterile, rhythmic prison. The hitch in her breath, a single tear traces a path down her cheek. The doctors call it procedural memory lock, her mind's desperate survival tactic. That same instinct for preservation has now become her unbreakable life sentence. John still visits every day, hoping to spark a memory of a world without schedules, of a love untethered by time. Her hand settles on the photograph, but her gaze remains fixed across the room. She watches the clock on the wall, its relentless second hand carving another moment into oblivion. Then, her own finger begins to tap, a perfect, silent sync with the ticking. The morning coffee, the commute, the nightly news. These routines became the only landmarks left in her world. When the map became the territory, every familiar path felt alien and suffocating. Sarah Miller returned from the void, but part of her remained trapped in that silent, hollow echo. Now the scent of ozone clung to her skin, and every whisper in the dark felt like a cold, sticky touch from the place she'd escaped. A flawless, patient echo, and it forces you to question, in the quiet, automated patterns of our own lives, how much of us truly remains. The screen goes dark. The final sound is the steady, metronomic tick of a clock. The ticking distorts, slowing down, warping, until its rhythm finally syncs with the steady, organic thump of a human heartbeat. The oppressive quiet that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the dark. The air itself seemed to congeal, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old iron. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but a cold, numbing dread had rooted his feet to the spot. It was the silence of a held breath, of a world waiting.
Curious? Subscribe and step through the next anomaly.